Prior to the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and the era when Bellevue Avenue transformed into a row of opulent marble estates vying for dominance, a single residence kicked off the entire spectacle. Château-sur-Mer, the seaside fortress. Back in 1852, while the majority of Newport's seasonal guests settled for simple wooden homes, William Shepherd Wetmore constructed a bold alternative, a sturdy granite estate that proclaimed the emergence of a fresh wave of prosperity in America. Wealth from the China trade, vast sums earned by transporting tea and silk over the Pacific. Wetmore aimed to broadcast his success to everyone, yet the structure open to visitors now isn't Wetmore's original creation. 2 decades following his passing, his son, George Peabody Wetmore, brought on the nation's premier designer to elevate it into an even more imposing landmark. Richard Morris Hunt. Having just completed lavish homes for the Vanderbilts, he reshaped Wetmore's impressive villa into Newport's inaugural genuine chateau. The evolution of Château-sur-Mer mirrors Newport's own journey, from a serene getaway for established trading clans to the grand theater of America's opulent era, where refined European aesthetics met bold U.S. drive along the Rhode Island shoreline. How one lineage's riches, forged in the East, laid the foundation that every subsequent Newport property emulated. This narrative uncovers the origins of the pioneering abode, the residence that established the benchmark, the property that demonstrated Newport's potential beyond mere vacation spot. It could symbolize authority, sophistication, and enduring legacy. Everything originated with a trader who spotted potential amid what others viewed as mere remoteness and peril. William Shepherd Wetmore, the China trade magnate. William Shepherd Wetmore forged his wealth from scratch, voyage by voyage along the globe's most perilous commercial path. Born in 1871 in New York, he hailed from solid yet unremarkable roots. His route to riches stretched across the planet to the China trade, which was forging and ruining U.S. businessmen in the nascent 1800s. The China trade proved merciless. Journeys lasting half a year, rounding Cape Horn or braving pirate-haunted seas off Southeast Asia. Vessels vanished in tempests, illnesses decimated sailors, and livelihoods hung on tea and silk cargoes that could turn obsolete if trends evolved. Still, for survivors who thrived, the gains were immense. Wetmore carved out his niche in the firm Wetmore & Crider, based in New York with ties to Canton. Their approach was direct yet demanded unyielding resolve. Acquire U.S. products, mainly cotton and ginseng, ferry them to China, barter for tea, silk, and porcelain. Return them to New York, offload at huge profits, continue the cycle. What distinguished top China merchants went beyond chance. It hinged on intelligence, identifying trustworthy Chinese dealers, grasping timing in Pacific markets, employing skippers adept at hazardous seas and intricate deals in Canton's international enclave. Wetmore excelled remarkably in each area. By the 1840s, records from the time indicate he'd amassed assets surpassing $1 million. Adjusted for today, that's easily over $30 million. For a bootstrapped entrepreneur in his 30s, such affluence was phenomenal. However, Wetmore encountered a challenge typical of upstart tycoons. New York's long-standing Knickerbocker lineages, heirs to Dutch pioneers who'd long dominated Manhattan, showed little regard for China trade windfalls. Funds were essential, but hardly enough for societal integration. The Astors had decoded this, converting fur profits into property and prestige. Wetmore required his distinctive plan. Newport offered the solution. During the early 1850s, Newport was evolving. Formerly a bustling colonial harbor challenging Boston and New York, it had faded commercially, but was rediscovering itself as a coastal haven. Families from southern estates headed north to flee the swelter. Veteran traders from Boston and New York erected basic seaside dwellings. The vibe remained refined, leisurely, without airs. Wetmore recognized the prospects. Newport boasted social allure minus the inflexible castes of New York or Boston. An extravagant dwelling there could position him as a figure of refinement and standing. Its yearly rhythm allowed for extravagant hosting over a short span, sparing the ongoing pressures of full-time elite status in New York. In 1850, Wetmore acquired land on the future Bellevue Avenue. The spot was cleverly chosen, near the core summer enclave for credibility, yet distant enough to assert presence. Seascapes, ample grounds, space for a noteworthy edifice. He engaged Seth Bradford, a noted regional builder, with a precise directive: erect a home that signals triumph. No bungalow or retreat, but a grand manor poised to reshape Newport's possibilities. Wetmore wed Annie Darby Rogers in 1851, offspring of the esteemed Providence clan. The union embodied precisely the social prominence that William Wetmore pursued, blended long-standing Rhode Island prestige with fresh wealth from the China commerce. Annie contributed her elite networks, while William supplied the resources for opulent living. Work on the estate commenced promptly. Wetmore aimed to have his grand display prepared by the 1852 summer social whirl. During a time when erecting a sturdy residence could span 2 to 3 years, this goal showed bold determination. Yet Wetmore, schooled in the China trade, knew that seizing the moment was crucial. The structure emerging on Bellevue Avenue that season stunned Newport observers. Granite construction amid wooden builds elsewhere, imposing scale against modest ones, and elegant formality contrasting relaxed designs. Wetmore had ordered the inaugural grand residence that viewed Newport not merely as a seasonal retreat, but as a platform for bold societal aspirations. He dubbed it Château-sur-Mer, evoking a seaside fortress. The title itself conveyed intent. It eschewed the quaint English villa labels preferred by fellow vacationers. Instead, a French chateau. European refinement fused with U.S. drive along the Rhode Island shoreline. Wetmore's triumphs in the China trade stemmed from shrewd gambles and precise timing. He intended to wield those same tactics in securing his status in Newport. The residence formed the bedrock. Events unfolding within would decide if his venture succeeded. Erecting the initial structure spanned 1851 to 1852. Architect Seth Bradford confronted a novel task. His patron desired an unprecedented Newport edifice. However, 1851's tools and resources constrained possibilities. Bradford, a respected figure in Rhode Island design, excelled at robust granite edifices that radiated stability and dignity. Wetmore selected him because Bradford mastered stonework, crafting structures that felt commanding yet timeless. The blueprint Bradford devised drew from the Italian villa aesthetic, then rising in favor for country and leisure homes. This approach suited Wetmore ideally. It appeared stylish without ostentation, solid without resembling a bastion. It hinted at refined European sensibilities while avoiding outright imitation of old-world templates. The layout revolved around a 3-level granite core, accented by a striking turret ascending from one side. The turret fulfilled various roles. It yielded a striking profile noticeable from the sea. It enabled lofty interiors for a majestic main atrium, and it proclaimed that this stood as no mere seasonal bungalow, but a weighty design declaration. Bradford called for granite sourced from nearby quarries, hefty slabs hauled by ox teams to the location. The building technique relied on age-old load-bearing masonry, dense granite barriers upholding timber beams for floors and roof supports. Demanding in manpower, costly and deliberate, it instilled the lasting quality Wetmore insisted upon. Outer features captured the Italian villa essence via thoughtful accents. A corbelled cornice encircling the eaves, curved openings evoking Southern European influence. The turret topped with an observation deck for sweeping sea vistas, broad overhangs casting shelter and depth. The total impression projected strength, reliability, and assurance. Reports from the time indicate the dwelling held 30 to 35 chambers, generous for the era yet not entirely novel. Its distinction lay in the proportions and craftsmanship, chambers boasting 14-foot heights, doorways surpassing human stature, ornate plaster and carpentry rivaling city palaces rather than beach retreats. The primary atrium soared across several levels beneath the turret, forging an imposing entry zone. Bradford crafted a sweeping stairway as the centerpiece, enabling arrivals to unfold dramatically and draw attention. In a period where societal customs held great weight, such built-in theater proved vital. The project schedule pushed boundaries. Site preparations started in spring 1851, with the building largely finished by summer 1852. This demanded synchronizing various craftsmen, steady material flows, and ample funds to sustain momentum. Wetmore proved adept at orchestrating the logistics that had fueled his China ventures. Expenses apparently topped $100,000, an immense outlay then. To compare, a respectable trader's home in Providence ran $15,000 to $20,000. A cozy Newport bungalow might cost $5,000 to $10,000. Wetmore invested tenfold over typical local standards. Bradford incorporated cutting-edge features for the day, including gas illumination everywhere, a rarity in 1850s Newport, a warm air furnace setup for whole-house heating, extending usability beyond summer norms, up-to-date water systems with flowing taps, although lavatories stayed basic compared to future luxuries. The surrounding landscape drew comparable care. Wetmore hired garden experts to fashion structured plantings, approach roads for coaches, and deliberate shrubbery placement. The estate covered multiple acres, sufficient to evoke a secluded domain rather than, it was essentially a spacious home on an expansive plot. Upon Chatter's debut for its inaugural summer in 1852, Newport lacked any structure to rival it. The Wetmore's adjacent residents occupied timber-framed dwellings that typically featured 15 or 20 chambers. They hosted gatherings on verandas. Their landscapes were enjoyable, yet unassuming. Such abodes served as refuges from the sweltering weather, rather than bold declarations. Wetmore had constructed a grand estate capable of year-round use when required, boasting proportions and detailing suited to elaborate social functions. He had fashioned what would subsequently be termed a summer cottage, though it was truly a formidable dwelling employed on a seasonal basis. The property fulfilled its core objective admirably. The Wetmores were able to receive guests with opulence. They organized galas, banquets, and soirees that solidified their prominence within Newport's elite circles. The design alone signaled that William Shepherd Wetmore, notwithstanding his newfound fortune, possessed depth and refinement. Bradford had supplied precisely what Wetmore sought, a residence that linked long-standing mercantile dignity with the emerging extravagance of the Gilded Age. It endured for 20 years as Newport's finest abode until subsequent inheritors deemed it insufficient. Newport prior to the Gilded Age. In 1852, Newport showed scant similarity to the lavish marble haven it would evolve into. The community that greeted William Wetmore's fresh estate was still defining itself, suspended between its colonial heritage and an ambiguous tomorrow. The settlement had reached its zenith as a maritime hub during the 1770s. Prior to the Revolution, Newport matched Boston and New York in trade significance. The slave trade, rum production, and commercial vessels thrived. Wealth surged along the docks. Imposing colonial edifices graced the thoroughfares. The British takeover amid the war ensued, and Newport failed to reclaim its economic stature fully. By the mid-19th century, the harbor lay subdued. Major trading dynasties had relocated or faded. What persisted was a compact town boasting exceptional colonial buildings, temperate summer weather, and sea winds that provided respite from the stifling warmth afflicting southern metropolises. Families from southern plantations were the initial discoverers of Newport. Elites from Savannah and Charleston recognized the Rhode Island shoreline as a sanctuary from seasonal illnesses and sultriness. They ventured north in June, leased unpretentious properties, and lingered until September. The financial boost was appreciated, but limited. These were temporary guests, not settlers. They dispersed funds, yet erected few structures. Subsequently, clans from Boston and New York arrived. Established trading lineages pursued dignified seasonal respites. The Griswolds, the Hazards, the Masons, esteemed surnames from their native locales, yearning for breaks from city swelter. They erected what they dubbed cottages, albeit the label was interpretive. Cozy wooden residences with expansive verandas, likely containing 15 to 20 rooms tailored for leisurely warm-weather existence. Social dynamics remained relaxed compared to future norms. Households connected through professional ties or mutual networks in their urban bases. They convened for coastal outings, boating excursions, and casual suppers. The vibe prioritized ease over rivalry. Homes offered comfort without showiness. Amusements were refined, not extravagant. Ocean Drive and Bellevue Avenue functioned mainly as rural lanes. Farms persisted on sites destined to form America's priciest neighborhoods. The Cliff Walk, later a famed walkway beside opulent Gilded Age estates, amounted to a rugged seaside path trodden by townsfolk and bold seasonal sojourners. Newport's permanent inhabitants in 1850 numbered about 10,000. Summers added roughly 1,000 or 500 more arrivals. Inns and guest houses housed those without personal quarters. Venues like the Ocean House and Atlantic House served decorous households desiring salubrious coastal atmosphere. Faith influenced the Sabbath routine. Sundays focused on worship, eschewing leisure pursuits. The vacationing set joined services at Trinity Church or similar parishes, interacting with locals in a manner that grew unimaginable by the 1880s. Available diversions were restrained, seaside dips, albeit under rigid decorum for attire and gender mingling. Boating and sailing prevailed, though the sophisticated yachting scene had yet to emerge. Scenic carriage rides across the landscape, spontaneous concerts and whist games in family parlors. The locale's amenities mirrored its humble dimensions. Tight lanes surfaced in pebbles or remaining as earthen tracks. Absent a splendid business core, merely dispersed merchants meeting routine demands. The splendid Bellevue Avenue of coming eras consisted of fields and isolated manors, though shifts were evident to observant eyes. The railway reached in 1864, rendering Newport much easier to reach from New York and Boston. The journey from New York shrank from a grueling all-night steamer voyage to a feasible single-day excursion. This would P.E. The shift marked a profound change, even if it went largely unnoticed back then. Unlike the surrounding simple scenery, Wetmore'S Chateau Soumières rose in stark distinction. While locals opted for wooden structures, he had chosen granite. In place of cozy hideaways that others preferred, he fashioned a bold declaration in architecture. This sharp difference was intentional and drew attention. Certain long-standing clans viewed it as tasteless excess, the flaunting of fresh fortunes from the China trade in a bid for social standing. Yet some praised the boldness, arguing that Newport required such imposing residences to rival the emerging coastal vacation spots. The Wetmore'S hosted lavish gatherings frequently, galas, formal suppers, outdoor soirees, proving that the town could sustain refined societal pursuits beyond mere idle leisure. Annie Wetmore excelled as a hostess, orchestrating the intricate rituals of Gilded Age hospitality, amid the subtle maneuvers between entrenched elites and emerging arrivals. William Wetmore savored his success for little more than 10 years before passing away in 1862 at the age of 40. The very commerce that had enriched him offered no shield against disease. He bequeathed to Annie their 2 small children and the grand estate that had proclaimed his entry into Newport's upper echelons. His son, George Peabody Wetmore, just 12 at the time, assumed control of one of the area's premier properties and a legacy valued at millions of dollars. The choices young George made in the following 20 years would decide if Chateau Mare lingered as a vestige of Newport's initial seaside settlement or blossomed into an even more magnificent icon. William's passing thrust the 12-year-old George Peabody Wetmore, now vastly affluent and without a father, into a situation that might have overwhelmed lesser spirits. The elder Wetmore's demise in 1862 struck abruptly, attributed to sickness, although precise accounts are elusive. At 40, he stood at the pinnacle of his societal ascent, poised for many more years of relishing the status and riches he had amassed. Rather, his spouse Annie and their offspring confronted the task of safeguarding their assets and prestige in his absence. The bulk of the inheritance devolved to George, arranged via trusts that shielded the principal sum and the adolescent from rash choices. Accounts from the era indicate the bequest surpassed $2 million, though confirming the precise amount proves challenging. Conservative valuations still ranked George among the nation's richest youths. Annie Wetmore grappled with a quandary typical of affluent bereaved women in that era. She might withdraw into seclusion, nurturing her family discreetly beyond public gaze, or uphold the prominence her late husband had secured. Opting for the second path, she persisted in receiving guests at Chateau Mayor and guided her children into fitting social spheres. George's schooling started in standard fashion, with neighborhood instruction followed by attendance at elite prep academies. Yet Annie understood that the uppermost strata dispatched their heirs to Europe for essential cultural enhancement. The customary grand tour, embraced by prosperous U.S. families, delivered insights unmatched by any homegrown schooling, exposure to fine arts, historic designs, foreign tongues, and polished manners. Such immersion distinguished true aristocrats from those merely endowed with money. Approaching his late adolescence, George set out on the prolonged continental odyssey that would indelibly mold his artistic outlook. Destinations included Paris, Rome, Florence, and London, encompassing renowned museums, exhibitions, iconic edifices, exclusive private troves opened solely via elite connections, plus performances at operas, theaters, and intellectual salons. The period held special import. George journeyed amid the zenith of France's Second Empire as Napoleon III reshaped Paris into a majestic hub of sweeping avenues and enduring landmarks that continue to characterize it. The ruler's designers forged an innovative style in building, fusing timeless motifs with expansive proportions and cutting-edge methods. Ambitious U.S. travelers like George internalized these principles, importing them as blueprints for their domestic endeavors. Italy exerted a comparable sway. The opulent palazzos of Florence and Rome illustrated how structures could convey both dominance and elegance. The seamless fusion of visual arts, built forms, and ornamental flourishes in those edifices established benchmarks that U.S. tycoons would pour fortunes into replicating. During his overseas stint, George cultivated discerning preferences. He gained the ability to discern genuine excellence from extravagant outlay, true creative merit from trendy copies. He forged ties with creators, builders, and merchants who subsequently aided in sourcing artworks and decor for Teau. Beyond mere visual training, Europe revealed the lifestyles of ancient noble lineages, their modes of self-presentation, their deployment of edifices and artifacts to radiate command and sophistication. George perceived that authentic high society did not merely possess fine objects. They dwelled in settings that embodied a unified creative ethos. Upon his return to the United States in the early 1870s, he had transcended his former self. George Peabody Wetmore emerged as an affluent young successor, evolving into a discerning patron. He gained the expertise to commission and evaluate substantial projects in architecture and the arts. The residence constructed by his father now appeared insufficient. Château-sur-Mer stood out amid Newport's norms during the 1850s, yet George had encountered Renaissance estates and Second Empire lodgings. He had immersed himself in settings where each aspect, from muraled ceilings to fixture fittings, advanced a cohesive aesthetic harmony. The initial Château-sur-Mer had fulfilled William Wetmore's needs admirably. It proclaimed their presence, offered venues for gatherings, and solidified the Wetmore's status within Newport's elite circles. However, George's aspirations diverged. No longer did he require a declaration of arrival. The family's standing was secure. Instead, he aimed to craft an edifice that embodied his continental schooling and refined sensibilities. Practical factors also pressed upon him. At 2 decades old, the structure demanded modernizations. Trends had evolved. Grandeur that dazzled in 1852 felt outdated by 1875. Even Newport was transforming. Emerging clans were erecting more expansive dwellings. The Vanderbilts were poised to enter with fortunes that overshadowed the Wetmore's own. George confronted a pivotal choice. He might preserve his father's creation intact, acting as a steward of history. Alternatively, he could reshape it to mirror both his personal flair and the evolving aspirations of Newport. This decision would not only redefine his home, but also his place in Gilded Age circles. He opted for renovation over demolition and a complete overhaul, which could dishonor his father's legacy, choosing instead to elevate the existing foundation into a far more magnificent entity. In doing so, he sought to pay tribute to William Wetmore's accomplishments while infusing his own distinctive outlook. To achieve this, he required America's premier architect. During the 1870s, that figure was unequivocally Richard Morris Hunt. The impact of the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour altered the worldview of affluent Americans toward their homeland. Upon his return from Europe, George Peabody Wetmore viewed the United States anew, and this altered lens would profoundly influence Château-sur-Mer. The European structures that captivated him most exhibited shared traits. None arose haphazardly. Each chamber, nuance, and ornamental feature supported a broader creative intent. The Renaissance villas he examined in Florence transcended mere assemblages of attractive interiors. They constituted unified declarations on authority, heritage, and the ideal interplay of creativity and existence. In Second Empire Paris, he observed how innovation and splendor could harmonize. The designers under Napoleon III were producing edifices that blended cutting-edge innovations, gas illumination, advanced warming systems, metallic framing, while sustaining opulent embellishments comparable to those of bygone eras. The takeaway was evident: contemporary convenience need not forsake bold artistic pursuits. George devoted significant effort to scrutinizing architectural particulars. The ways French chateaux organized key areas for official receptions alongside intimate family retreats. The techniques Italian villas employed via elevated ceilings and adornments to denote spatial precedence. The methods English manor houses used to blend scholarly libraries and secluded chambers with expansive communal zones. These insights extended beyond mere visual appeal. They instructed on how design molded interpersonal dynamics. The artworks he discovered amplified these principles. He noted the presentation of classical canvases in tailored exhibition halls, the necessities for sculptures in terms of illumination and optimal vantage points, the elevation of utilitarian objects, furnishings, pottery, fabrics, to artistic heights through superior craftsmanship and display. Residences in 1850s America, including lavish ones like his father's Château-sur-Mer, seldom reached such seamless cohesion. During his journeys, George methodically gathered artifacts, not through bulk acquisitions, but via selective choices aligned with the criteria he was honing. Items such as Renaissance pottery, French cabinetry, and classical etchings and sketches. He was assembling a trove, yet more vitally, sharpening his discernment. This journey imparted a vital truth about affluence and refinement. Funds could procure lavish items, but forging a genuinely elegant milieu demanded insight, discernment, and perseverance. The divide between a tycoon's dwelling and a polished aristocrat's abode resided in these nuances. Old-world noble lineages held edges surpassing mere capital. They had bequeathed troves amassed across epochs. Their abodes had developed through ages. They wielded a cultural legitimacy that no surge of American riches could swiftly acquire. Yet George understood that astute support for exceptional designers and creators could accelerate that process. A discerning U.S. magnate with ample means might accomplish in 10 years what European dynasties required a century to attain. This epiphany guided his strategy for reimagining Château-sur-Mer. He avoided mimicking any particular continental edifice. Such imitation would prove unoriginal. He approached the project not as a mere sightseer, but as a discerning collector. Rather than relying solely on his own tastes, he sought out an architect versed in European traditions, yet skilled at tailoring them to fit American contexts and contemporary needs. The residence George had in mind would serve various purposes: as a cozy, up-to-date home equipped with cutting-edge amenities, as a venue for lavish social gatherings rivaling those in Newport, as a showcase for the artworks and decor he was amassing, and as a bold declaration of his refined cultural tastes. He desired spaces echoing the grandeur and balance of continental chateaux, lofty ceilings suited for intricate ornamentation, opulent yet enduring materials, expert workmanship to please his discerning gaze, and a seamless blend of structural and artistic features into a cohesive whole. Yet, George was attuned to practical American constraints. Continental estates catered to households supported by vast retinues of staff, constructed in times of abundant labor and endless timelines. Even for a tycoon of his stature, an American dwelling required streamlined operations. The personnel needed for its upkeep had to remain reasonable in number. Mechanical systems had to prove dependable. His extended travels abroad weren't meant to replicate Europe verbatim. Instead, they involved grasping the core ideas behind exceptional European design and reshaping them to forge a uniquely American creation, one merging majestic scale, continental artistry, innovative engineering, and Yankee practicality. These aspects weren't at odds, they formed the components George aimed to fuse together. Over the years, he had diligently studied, absorbed lessons, and gathered the expertise to act as a savvy commissioner. At this point, what he required was an architect equipped to bring this concept to life, an individual as deeply familiar with European styles as George himself, someone with a track record on ventures of comparable scope, a professional who could convert lofty ideals into tangible built forms. Richard Morris Hunt had crafted designs for the Vanderbilts. He had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He grasped both Old World heritage and New World drive. In essence, he stood as the sole candidate George truly weighed. The consultation between client and designer would decide if the breakers blossomed into one of Newport's masterpieces or lingered as a holdover from a bygone, less ornate period. George brought the foresight, scholarly background, and financial means. Hunt offered the schooling, proven expertise, and imaginative flair. In partnership, they would elevate William Wetmore's sturdy stone retreat into an edifice beyond the founder's wildest dreams. Engaging Richard Morris Hunt in the 1870s. By the middle of the 1870s, Richard Morris Hunt hardly required the Wetmore assignment. He had already risen as America's premier architect, juggling more projects than he could handle. Still, the prospect of reimagining an established Newport estate on a more imposing scale ignited his creative drive. Hunt's origins set him apart from his peers in American architecture. Born in 1827 into an affluent Vermont household, he enjoyed privileges unavailable to most. Following his father's untimely passing, his mother relocated the family overseas, where the adolescent Richard cultivated the visual sensibilities that would mark his professional path. In 1846, aged 19, Hunt accomplished a feat unmatched by any fellow countryman, entry into the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris, the globe's foremost academy for architecture. Over 5 years, he immersed himself in its demanding classical curriculum, sketching from historic relics, mastering ratios and embellishments, and exploring how structures could embody societal ideals via shape and nuance. The École's methodology went beyond mere mechanics. It instilled in students the view of edifices as holistic artistic expressions. From broad silhouettes to the tiniest flourishes, every part ought to harmonize into a singular impact. This all-encompassing philosophy would elevate Hunt's domestic projects above the utilitarian structures of his rivals. Upon finishing his coursework, Hunt stayed in Europe during the 1850s, assisting in Hector Lefeuille's studio on the Louvre's enlargement. He witnessed up close how Napoleon III's builders were revitalizing Paris. Those encounters showed him ways to infuse timeless motifs with fresh innovations for comfort and utility. Hunt came back to the United States in 1855, launching his firm in New York. His pedigree and overseas exposure lent him instant prestige among affluent patrons desiring elegant builds. Whereas competitors delivered solid yet ordinary plans, Hunt delivered the continental refinement that America's new elite yearned for. His initial undertakings highlighted his versatility. The 10th Street studio in New York provided dedicated quarters for creative professionals. The Lenox Library infused a touch of Parisian splendor onto Fifth Avenue. Commissioned homes for the Griswold and Marquand clans illustrated Hunt found that he could operate on a residential level without sacrificing grand design goals. Yet the project that truly cemented his preeminence arrived from William Kissam Vanderbilt. The Vanderbilts possessed fortunes from railroads that overshadowed nearly all other American riches. Still, they encountered the familiar dilemma of newly affluent dynasties. Wealth alone couldn't guarantee societal prestige or artistic legitimacy. Hunt crafted the Vanderbilt residence on 665th Avenue, finished in 1883. This structure marked a breakthrough for New York City. Modeled as a 5-story French chateau with limestone exteriors, intricate carvings, and lavish inner spaces comparable to continental royal residences, it proclaimed the Vanderbilt status not merely as tycoons, but as supporters of high-caliber design. The triumph of this Vanderbilt endeavor revolutionized Hunt's career. Wealthy aspirants everywhere sought to replicate the family's accomplishment. Now, Hunt selected his patrons, dictated conditions, and tackled designs that sparked his creative interest. In the mid-1870s, George Peabody Wetmore consulted Hunt, though the precise timing is uncertain. George presented an intriguing opportunity, not erecting a fresh edifice on vacant land, but elevating an older home to far greater splendor. This puzzle suited Hunt's knack for innovative solutions. The pair shared key traits. Each had matured abroad in Europe, grasped that buildings should embody cultural dreams beyond mere functionality, and held faith that U.S. prosperity could uphold old-world levels of artistry and detail. Their partnership unfolded as a true collaboration, free of rigid power dynamics. Hunt inspected the Château-sur-Mer and evaluated its current state. Seth Bradford's 1852 blueprint was sturdy, meticulously constructed, and suitably positioned, yet it remained essentially a fine villa rather than a regal domain. Its proportions were dignified but not imposing. The rooms, though cozy, wanted the verticality and balance for opulent adornments. The facade, despite solid granite craftsmanship, reflected mid-19th century moderation more than Gilded Age extravagance. Hunt discerned untapped possibilities. The core framework could be preserved and augmented. Those granite surfaces offered a firm base for bolder forms. The property allowed for extensions. The key lay in blending the original and additions into a seamless entity, ensuring the upgrade appeared organic, not forced. He outlined a thorough overhaul inspired by Second Empire aesthetics. Elevate the rooftop for taller main chambers, install a mansard roof adorned with ornate dormers, the hallmark of Paris-style grandeur. Append side extensions to expand areas and enhance flow. Revamp the outside with decorative overlays to harmonize legacy parts with fresh ones. Executing the scheme demanded advanced engineering. Current walls needed bolstering and extension upward. Fresh steel supports would bear the enlarged top levels and sloped roof. Contemporary construction methods enabled alterations unthinkable 2 decades prior. Hunt's blueprint extended far past surface modifications. He planned to strip out most of the insides, fashioning spaces with the dimensions and polish that George's continental schooling required. The entry hall would evolve into a soaring multi-level atrium. Key chambers would boast ceilings at least 15 feet high. Ornamental schemes would come from artisans schooled in Europe, adhering to Beaux-Arts ideals. The undertaking was vast in scale, not a simple refresh or modernization, but a complete reconception of the residence's potential. In effect, Hunt was conceiving a novel structure that reused elements of the prior one. George recognized the dedication involved. Completion would demand years of effort. Expenses would soar, probably multiplying the initial build costs manyfold. The household would have to move out amid construction, yet the outcome would embody all George absorbed overseas, realized by the designer who epitomized America's opulent era in architecture. For such grand commissions, Hunt's compensation was considerable but reasonable within the realm of top-tier design services. His true worth lay not only in conceptual prowess, but in orchestrating the teams of artisans, creators, and vendors essential for such ventures. He sourced elite European suppliers for materials unmatched domestically. He maintained ties with carvers, painters, and embellishers skilled in complex artistic endeavors. The pact between George Wetmore and Richard Morris Hunt symbolized an ideal alignment. A commissioner equipped with the insight to value Hunt's creations, the funds to fund them, and the forbearance to endure the process. An architect operating at his peak, ready to, with the expertise, background, and imaginative flair, to elevate an established structure into one of Newport's standout architectural gems. Construction was set to commence shortly. The ambitious declaration by Shotter William Wetmore in 1852 was on the verge of realizing a vision far beyond what its originator might have envisioned. This overhaul would span most of a 10-year period and set benchmarks that subsequent Newport estates would find challenging to surpass. The overhaul during the 1870s, the refurbishment of Château Mayor, kicked off in 1876 and extended for almost 3 years. What Hunt envisioned went far beyond merely modernizing an aged residence. It was akin to surgical intervention in architecture, safeguarding worthwhile features while entirely reconceptualizing the rest. The most striking alteration was evident from afar. Hunt incorporated a complete mansard roof, the hallmark of Second Empire style. The prior structure featured a straightforward hipped roof with subtle projections. The updated mansard ascended sharply, sheathed in decorative slate, accented by ornate dormers boasting their own tiny roofs and embellishments. The shift in outline was total. Bradford's approach had been sturdy and understated, whereas Hunt's exuded vitality and a clear Parisian influence. Beyond its visual appeal, the mansard offered functional benefits. It converted former attic areas into practical rooms, introducing a full level of sleeping quarters and utility zones. The added elevation also enabled Hunt to boost the ceilings in the main areas underneath, achieving the ideal dimensions for the opulent interiors he had in mind. Hunt substantially enlarged the residence. Fresh extensions contributed thousands of square feet, providing adequate support areas, extra accommodations for visitors, and room for the core spaces to grow. These expansions blended seamlessly with the original framework, employing identical granite on the base levels, making it tough to discern the boundary between the old and the added sections. The facade's design pulled everything together cohesively. Hunt incorporated decorative flourishes across the board, including intricate frames around windows, sculpted panels, and ornate corbels upholding the eaves. The granite, once unadorned in Bradford's scheme, now served as a canvas for lavish embellishments true to Second Empire flair. The building retained its robust granite essence while acquiring a refined Parisian elegance. A porte cochere was constructed at the front, permitting carriages to drop off visitors under cover. This went beyond mere practicality. It was a piece of scenic architecture. It allowed for properly orchestrated entrances, with guests stepping straight from vehicles into the foyer, shielded from the elements. The elegant protocols Hunt absorbed during his European studies were now adapted to fit American settings. Implementing Hunt's design demanded extensive structural modifications. The current granite walls required bolstering to bear the extra elevation and load. Steel girders, an innovative material at the time, were integrated to bridge wide openings and uphold the additional levels. Crafting the mansard roof involved intricate woodworking to achieve its distinctive shape without compromising stability. Hunt integrated contemporary infrastructure throughout. An upgraded heating system with far greater output ensured the home could be enjoyed in comfort across all seasons. Gas illumination was enhanced and broadened, featuring bespoke fixtures tailored to suit each space's ambiance. The water system was overhauled, incorporating several lavish bathrooms instead of the basic setup from the earlier version. The approach to windows underwent a major shift. Hunt recognized the importance of daylight for showcasing artwork and fostering inviting rooms. He expanded current openings and introduced fresh ones, positioned thoughtfully to illuminate targeted areas without undermining the facade's overall harmony. The extra glasswork brightened the insides while upholding the seclusion and intimacy typical of grand residences. The outside decorations merited meticulous care. Hunt collaborated with artisans to produce bespoke sculpted features. Every window frame was unique, each with its personalized motif carved into stone with the exactitude expected from Beaux-Arts principles. The mansard dormers showcased engraved panels, wrought iron accents, and slate motifs that added intrigue over the whole rooftop surface. The hues were deliberately managed. Granite stayed as the primary substance, its somber gray lending weight, but Hunt added variety via the slate covering with red and black designs for depth and intricacy. Frames around windows and accents were coated to harmonize with the masonry rather than overshadow it. The result was lavish yet orderly, expressive without excess. Reports from the era indicate the project expenses ranged from $300,000 to $400,000, although precise amounts remain hard to confirm. To put it in perspective, the initial build had run about $100,000. Hunt's reworking demanded multiples of that original outlay, underscoring both the project's breadth and the superior craftsmanship. The schedule for the project was notably tight, even for an extensive overhaul of this magnitude. Preparations and early dismantling kicked off in 1876. The bulk of the building phase unfolded in 1877 and 1878. Come 1879, much of the facade had been finalized, with efforts now focusing on the intricate internal detailing that would persist for additional years. During the build, the Wetmore household moved out, probably to their place in New York. Overseeing such a massive endeavor from within the residence would have proven unfeasible. The clouds of dust, constant clamor, and upheaval caused by scores of laborers bringing Hunt's design to life demanded unfettered entry to the estate. Throughout, Hunt kept a vigilant eye on progress. In contrast to certain renowned designers who handed off on-site oversight to subordinates, he recognized that the excellence sought by both him and George Wetmore called for his direct involvement. Frequent inspections guaranteed that artisans followed the precise blueprints and that the myriad choices emerging amid the work stayed true to the broader design intent. The overhaul of Château-sur-Mer exemplified the outcomes achievable when a discerning client, skilled designer, and ample funding converged. Hunt had elevated a solid yet outdated manor into one of Newport's inaugural grand estates. The resulting structure stood on equal footing with the era's most lavish builds during the Gilded Age. It underscored how deliberate upgrades could yield outcomes comparable to starting from scratch. As the outer shell neared completion, the local community in Newport began to pay attention. The dwelling William Wetmore had erected to signal his status had evolved into an entity of far greater splendor. George Peabody Wetmore had built upon his father's foundational efforts with resounding success. Château-sur-Mer transcended mere admiration. It had become a triumph of artistry. Yet the facade represented just part of the narrative. The wonders Hunt and George were crafting within promised to surpass even that, the lavishness and artistry of the inner spaces. While the outer changes captivated Newport, the innovations Hunt devised for Château-sur-Mer's interiors unveiled the true breadth of their aspirations. The Grand Hall emerged as the structural core of the residence. Hunt expanded it upward, spanning 2 stories beneath the tower that Bradford had conceived. Unlike Bradford's merely lofty version, however, Hunt's formed a fully immersive aesthetic realm. The vaulted roof climbed almost 40 feet, generating a sense of expanse that invited ornate embellishments without overwhelming the area. He engaged artisans from Italy to craft the overhead scheme. Intricately sculpted and gold-leafed rafters segmented the expanse into sections, each adorned with artwork. This evoked the grandeur of Renaissance villas that George had explored in Florence, yet tailored to serve as an inviting foyer rather than a stiff receiving area. Sunlight poured in from elevated openings along the tower's sides, brightening the interior while preserving a cozy containment below. The stairway underwent a total redesign. Hunt conceived a majestic processional flight that permitted dramatic entrances, with broad steps, a subtle incline, and ornate sculpted railings. Guests could linger on the intermediate platform, on view from the hall beneath, prior to ascending further. The spatial orchestration Hunt absorbed at the École des Beaux-Arts influenced every aspect of circulation and perception within the home. The library embodied George's refined tastes in European acquisitions and scholarship. Custom shelving from floor to ceiling and carved walnut housed countless books. The overhead design was subtler than in the Great Hall, yet no less refined, featuring recessed panels accented with gold. Hunt shaped the area to double as a practical study and an elegant parlor, with layouts adaptable for both purposes. The ballroom filled a significant portion of a freshly added extension. Hunt fashioned an area capable of hosting more than 100 dancers, with dimensions and sound qualities meticulously planned. The surfaces received coverings of rich-hued silk damask. The roof displayed illustrated sections bordered by ornate stucco. Bespoke crystal fixtures offered gaslighting and served as striking centerpieces even when unlit. Hunt's brilliance lay in fostering diversity amid harmony. Every key chamber possessed a distinct personality suited to its role, yet the underlying design vocabulary remained uniform across the board. From ceiling elevations to the ratios of portals and the interplay of partitions and voids, such core features ensured cohesion even as ornamental elements differed. The dining chamber highlighted Hunt's talent for merging majesty with coziness. Sized for elaborate meals seating 30 to 40 people, its detailing avoided any echo of vast emptiness. Deep-toned timber cladding, a formidable hearth boasting detailed mantel carvings, and a raftered canopy infused the area with inviting warmth regardless of its dimensions. The space suited both stately gatherings and intimate family occasions, finishes across the entire residence. The interiors showcased a blend of excellence and diversity in their execution. Marble featured prominently yet avoided uniformity, with varied hues and veining marking each area distinctly. Wood elements spanned from basic painted moldings in utilitarian zones to intricate sculpted panels in the main chambers. Flooring incorporated diverse parquet designs tailored to individual rooms, fostering visual appeal alongside the sturdy resilience needed for intense entertaining. Hunt devoted meticulous care to minutiae that many designers might have overlooked or streamlined. Hardware for doors was bespoke for every space, featuring bronze accents with motifs suited to the ambiance of each setting. Lighting was crafted on-site rather than sourced from catalogs, forming essential components of the room's overall harmony. Radiator covers, too, served as ornamental features, bronze-cast lattices that masked contemporary heating systems while enhancing the decorative scheme. The scheme of colors was more opulent and diverse than usual for U.S. homes of that era. Profound crimsons, warm yellows, lush emeralds. Hunt recognized how hues could render vast areas cozier and compact ones more imposing, yet he kept them restrained, avoiding excess, and offset them with the subdued tones of stone and timber for balance. The elder Wetmore'S collection of artworks received ideal presentation within Hunt's designs. Canvases benefited from walls of suitable scale and illumination. Sculptures were positioned for optimal observation angles. Items like Renaissance pottery and ornaments occupied custom alcoves and cabinets. Thus, the residence operated as a personal gallery without sacrificing livability. The fusion of up-to-date amenities with period aesthetics remained subtle. Heating units hid behind ornate screens, gas lines vanished into structural voids, and subsequent electrical installations blended seamlessly into pre-existing lamps with little alteration to the ornamental motifs. Drawing from his École des Beaux-Arts background, Hunt believed contemporary structures ought to embed cutting-edge innovations discreetly. Auxiliary areas got equivalent scrutiny to the primary ones, albeit with scaled-down opulence. The kitchen boasted state-of-the-art stoves and counters. Staff lodging was adequate rather than opulent, acknowledging the need for a sizable household team to sustain such an elaborate property. Hunt devised efficient pathways for servants, enabling unobtrusive navigation throughout the home for the household and visitors. Interior completion outlasted the facade overhaul. Plasterers, sculptors, decorators, and appliers of gold leaf followed one another in turn, their timelines synchronized to avert overlaps or setbacks. Hunt's firm generated precise plans for even the smallest components, leaving no room for guesswork or ad-libbing. This rigorous oversight stemmed from his education and insight that cohesive artistic impact demanded vigilance over every aspect. By the dawn of the 1880s, the inner spaces were largely finished. The collaboration between Hunt and George rivaled Newport's finest. Later arrivals like the Breakers and Marble House would eclipse it in size and cost, yet Château-sur-Mer illustrated how deliberate refinement, steered by refined discernment, could yield triumphs beyond mere lavish spending. At last, George Peabody Wetmore possessed the dwelling his continental schooling had instilled as his ideal. Hunt had shown American design could equal old-world benchmarks. Patron and designer together forged one of the Gilded Age's premier inner sanctums, a testament that emerging U.S. fortunes could foster true creative excellence. Newport's evolution, the 1880s construction surge. As Hunt reshaped Château-sur-Mer, the surrounding town underwent its own metamorphosis. The unassuming seasonal retreat that had embraced William Wetmore's estate in 1852 was swiftly evolving into an altogether grander entity. The decade ushered in a surge of riches to urban America. Vast estates, from rail, metal, fuel, and banking enterprises, spawned a fresh cadre of tycoons whose assets far outstripped prior trading fortunes. These clans sought venues to exhibit their triumphs, and Newport provided the ideal venue. The Vanderbilts led the influx of colossal wealth. Cornelius Vanderbilt II commenced the Breakers in 1893, a 70-room Italianate villa that reset norms for grandeur in U.S. residences. Its price tag allegedly exceeded $7 million, over double the sum George invested in revitalizing Château-sur-Mer. Alva Vanderbilt engaged Hunt for Marble House, finished in 1892. The title fit precisely. Interiors clad in marble, valued at millions, evoking continental royal domains. Alva's goals were overtly rivalrous. She aimed for a mansion that would compel elite circles to affirm Vanderbilt prestige. The Astors, Belmonts, and scores of others' families trailed along. Bellevue Avenue evolved from a rural lane dotted with isolated properties into a parade of rival architectural visions. Rosecliff, Rough Point, Ochre Court. Every mansion sought to surpass its counterparts in size, expense, or creative flair. The rivalry among builders pushed expenditures and aspirations upward, season by season. A residence that appeared grand one year seemed humble beside the arrivals of the following. Designers vied to deliver the grandest plans. Skilled artisans from Europe were brought in when local talent fell short of the demanded excellence. The expenses proved immense, even for those with vast fortunes. This surge in construction fostered a unique situation for estates like Chateau Maillard. George's overhaul had been innovative in the late 1870s, yet by the early 1890s, it stood as just one among numerous splendid homes, no longer the pace-setter. The breakers boasted 70 rooms against Chateau's roughly 40. Marble House had demanded millions extra. Fresher builds featured complete electrical systems from the outset, not added later. Still, Chateau held specific strengths. It had been finished with care across multiple years, avoiding the haste of a one-season social declaration. Hunt's blueprint was refined rather than showy, reflecting true design expertise instead of just flaunting riches. The place evoked a home for refined inhabitants who truly resided there, not a showpiece crafted solely for societal rivalry. Newport's social landscape altered amid the fresh builds. The established trading clans that once led the initial seaside gatherings saw themselves sidelined by fortunes from industry. Cash by itself fell short, but paired with drive for status and bold structures, it compelled acknowledgement. The Vanderbilts illustrated how enormous wealth could shatter any class obstacles. Gatherings grew more lavish and intense, dances for 400 or 500 attendees, feasts needing weeks of preparation and hordes of extra help, outdoor soirees that reshaped whole grounds. The grandeur of these events rose alongside building fervor. Mansions required vastness not merely for show, but to serve as proper settings for the opulent hosting that marked Newport's elite circle. The financial effects on Newport proved profound. The construction frenzy hired thousands, from expert overseas makers to area hands. Ventures catering to the seasonal influx ballooned. Inns, stores, and support services all thrived on the arrival of tycoon households and their lavish outlays. Yet, the shift erased something vital. The easygoing, leisurely vibe of Newport's beginnings faded away. These grand palaces brought rigid class structures and showy contests that turned summers into spectacles rather than respites. The unpretentious charm that drew clans like the Wetmore'S in the 1850s vanished, supplanted by rigid etiquette and endless status games. George Peabody Wetmore observed the changes with conflicting emotions. One might picture him as a pioneer, updating his father's dwelling ahead of the major wave. Teau-sur-Mer had aided in proving Newport's capacity for weighty design and elegant circles. However, the wealth surge of the 1880s propelled matters well past his or Hunt's original scope. The estate endured as one of Newport's top gems. Hunt's standing guaranteed its view as substantive design, beyond mere costly pomp. George's refined palette ensured the room served as both living space and curated haven, not just scenery for elite clashes. Chateau-sur-Mer embodied an alternative path to affluence and ostentation, leaning European in its poise and polish versus the bold U.S. drive of spots like the Breakers. By the 1890s, Newport had morphed into something William Wetmore couldn't have foreseen when erecting his stone pile in 1852. The simple beach outpost had become America's densest showcase of opulence. Scores of tycoon lineages vied to erect the biggest abodes, throw the flashiest bashes, and secure spots in a pecking order shaped by building extravagance and blatant extravagance. Chateau-sur marked the start, the abode that revealed Newport's potential beyond a mere vacation spot. The edifice that demonstrated U.S. riches could uphold old-world building ideals. the shift that positioned Richard Morris Hunt as the go-to creator for driven magnates. The palace had triumphed, far exceeding William Wetmore's hopes, yet in triumphing, it had fueled a Newport distant from his era. The serene seaside haven had departed. In its stead rose a golden platform where the nation's wealthiest kin enacted their rank for one another amid the global gaze. George Peabody. George Peabody Wetmore might have easily settled into the role of a refined collector, relying on his inherited fortune and overseeing his properties. Yet, he opted for public involvement, a choice that profoundly influenced his personal path and the operations of Teau. His foray into politics seemed predestined, considering his deep ties to Rhode Island's heritage and his considerable assets. The political landscape of the state during the late 1800s aligned perfectly with someone of his stature, a prominent family lineage, significant riches, and an education that earned widespread admiration. He held every edge imaginable, save for one essential quality he'd have to cultivate via experience: shrewd political acumen. Wetmore started at the grassroots level, immersing himself in Republican activities across Newport and Providence. The tasks were far from flashy, involving routine gatherings, backing aspiring politicians, and grasping the intricacies of Rhode Island's intricate political system. For a man who could have devoted his days solely to the upper echelons of Newport's elite circles, his commitment to hands-on governance highlighted a sincere drive for community betterment. In 1884, the Rhode Island Republican Party selected him as their gubernatorial candidate. The election exposed conflicts between his dual realms. Among Newport's upper class, politics often seemed unbecoming for those of true elegance. Engaging in gritty voter outreach and mass appeals clashed with the gentlemanly ideal. Still, the state's electorate demanded that aspirants campaign vigorously to show their investment in gaining votes. Wetmore emerged victorious. Historical records indicate the success stemmed largely from the party's robust infrastructure rather than his own charisma on the trail. He held the governorship from 1885 to 1887, completing a 2-year stint that showcased his reliability while underscoring his shortcomings as a leader. His administration proved solid, yet unremarkable. He championed standard Republican stances of the period, including stable currency, tariff protections, and streamlined governance. He avoided bold overhauls or forging a dedicated following. His style leaned practical over inspirational, which met public approval, but failed to inspire fervent allegiance. Following his governorship, Wetmore retreated to his private affairs, though briefly. By 1894, the Rhode Island legislature appointed him to the U.S. Senate, a process then dominated by state bodies, not direct elections, which suited profiles like his, affluent, networked, and esteemed. The Senate fit Wetmore more comfortably than the executive role had. It emphasized subcommittee duties, legislative crafting, and dealings with equals over relentless public stumping. His scholarly background and societal links proved advantageous in the Capitol. He engaged in discussions with poise, hosted peers at his D.C. home, and advanced Rhode Island's agenda with the authority his origins lent. Wetmore's Senate service ran from 1895 to 1913, save for a short hiatus encompassing pivotal shifts in U.S. history: the Spanish-American War, progressive reforms, and the nation's initial rise as a world force. He contributed to deliberations that molded the contemporary American framework. His stances mirrored his upbringing and passions. He endorsed naval growth, fitting for a resident of a maritime-heavy state. He favored tariff safeguards that aided Rhode Island's fabric sector. He promoted cultural pursuits and schooling, echoing his own refined tastes. While steadfastly Republican in his votes, he avoided dogmatic extremes. Nevertheless, Wetmore grappled with a core dilemma afflicting many affluent officeholders: reconciling clashing spheres. Demands in Washington necessitated extended stays and focus. Newport's elite anticipated his attendance in summer. His duties in politics vied with social duties, breeding ongoing strain. Teau evolved into a haven from governmental strains, a spot where the senator could revert to plain George, hosting companions, savoring his artifacts, and fleeing the deals and disappointments of office. The estate fulfilled roles beyond his father's vision, less as a venue for ostentatious gatherings and more as a personal refuge for authenticity over public pretense. His governmental role enhanced the property in subtle ways. DC ties brought notable evening hosts to Château-sur-Mer, Senate colleagues, executive officials, and foreign dignitaries, offering Newport rare insights into power brokers. Wetmore provided more than mere amusement, meaningful exchanges on federal matters from a decision-maker. This juggling proved exhausting. Wetmore's well-being deteriorated amid the dual demands of capital and coastal life. His legislative impact suffered from divided attentions. His social standing, George Peabody Wetmore's involvement in politics, proved challenging amid the chaotic realm of public service in Newport. He managed success in both his personal and political domains, yet truly dominated in none, owing to his reluctance to prioritize one at the expense of the other. By 1913, when he turned 63, Wetmore stepped away from the Senate. Historians debate whether this move stemmed from personal preference or external pressures, though details remain ambiguous. After almost 20 years in office, a respectable tenure, he exited without any taint of scandal or major upheaval. His exit unfolded discreetly, fitting for someone who had never aggressively pursued fame. Stepping back from politics enabled Wetmore to devote himself entirely to Château-sur-Mer after many years of divided attention. He could now immerse in full Newport summers, free from demands in Washington. His passions for collecting and cultural pursuits flourished uninterrupted by governmental duties. At last, the residence operated as Richard Morris Hunt had intended, and George himself had dreamed. A haven for elegant living, not a platform for societal or political displays. Wetmore's foray into politics highlighted a key aspect of Gilded Age affluence. Financial resources and elite status opened doors to elected roles, but they failed to ensure exceptional statesmanship or revolutionary influence. As Rhode Island's governor, he proved capable. As a senator, he offered steady service to his state and country with respectability, though lacking flair. His true legacy lay not in governance, but in illustrating how vast fortunes could underpin meaningful civic contributions. Unlike many Newport peers who dismissed politics as unworthy or tangential to their leisure, Wetmore showed that a refined individual could participate in democracy without compromising his sophistication or prestige. Château-sur-Mer had embodied this balanced existence for years. It welcomed lavish gatherings for Newport's elite, alongside strategic talks with Capitol Hill allies. Serving as both a secluded sanctuary and a partly public venue, it thrived on the adaptability Hunt infused during the 1870s renovations, a structure robust enough to handle diverse roles while retaining its core as an upscale abode. In the 1910s, the estate embarked on its concluding chapter, no longer a bold statement of newfound riches or a base for a statesman's divided life, but the serene dwelling of a former official embracing the refined pursuits and relaxation his European schooling had primed him for. The family's efforts in stewardship waned over time. Wetmore passed away in 1921 at 71, an event that went beyond personal loss. It foretold the close of the era Château-sur-Mer symbolized. The Gilded Age faded with its icons. The 1913 income tax burdened the upkeep of grand estates. World War I reshaped views on flashy riches and elite heirs. The foundations of Newport's seasonal enclave cracked amid fiscal and societal strains. His inheritance went to daughters Edith and Maud, both unmarried, who grappled with sustaining a property built for opulent hospitality in a time when such extravagance grew outdated. Running Château-sur-Mer demanded dozens of servants. Yearly expenses for repairs, levies, and operations loomed large, even against a legacy from China trade windfalls. The siblings strove to uphold the mansion and their father's artifacts. They spent summers there into the 1920s and 1930s, albeit scaled back from George's grand days. Lavish soirees and theatrical events dwindled. The home turned more intimate, shifting from performative spectacle to quiet habitation. The 1929 market collapse and ensuing downturn tested even mighty estates. Numerous Newport households could no longer afford their palaces. Some fell to demolition, others repurposed as facilities or auctioned off cheaply relative to build costs. The once enduring summer retreat proved as vulnerable as any edifice reliant on fortune and trends. World War II hastened Newport's fall from elite favor. Youth headed to battlefronts. Fuel limits hindered seasonal voyages. The lavish spending that marked Gilded Age summers clashed with wartime austerity. Families shuttered estates for the conflict, and many left them dormant forever. Edith Wetmore's death in 1966 ended family residency at Château-sur-Mer. She was the final kin to dwell there, preserving fragments of her father's ideal amid the evolving locale. The rivalry of tycoons had yielded to a community reimagining its historic legacy. The challenges confronting Château-sur-Mer and similar properties. The divide in the destinies of these grand residences stood out sharply, tearing them down or safeguarding them. Financial considerations leaned heavily toward destruction. The property's value surpassed that of the structures themselves by a wide margin. Upkeeping the homes proved costly, and repurposing them for contemporary needs was challenging. Numerous prominent Newport estates vanished in those years, razed for new projects or institutional growth. Yet, an opposing movement was taking shape. Founded in 1945, the Preservation Society of Newport County acknowledged that the city's Gilded Age estates embodied priceless architectural and historical treasures. These weren't merely oversized, outdated dwellings. They ranked as some of the premier instances of U.S. design from a pivotal era, crafted by top designers using superior materials and techniques impossible to duplicate today. In 1969, 3 years following Edith's passing, the group took ownership of Château-sur-Mer. It joined the ranks of various Newport properties accessible to visitors as exhibits, alongside the Breakers, Marble House, and more, illustrating the narrative of Gilded Age society via its built environment. Opting to conserve Château-sur-Mer over razing, it stemmed from multiple influences. Hunt's elaborate interior schemes remained largely unaltered. Although the Wetmore clan's artifacts had scattered, records of some survived. The design excellence was beyond question, showcasing Hunt's efforts during a key moment in his professional life. Moreover, the estate's past, from William Wetmore's initial build to George's overhaul, captured Newport's shift from a simple seasonal retreat to a Gilded Age spectacle. Safeguarding it demanded substantial effort. Years of neglected repairs required fixing. Compliance with current standards meant overhauling wiring, pipes, and fire protections. Adjustments for tourist access were essential, all while retaining its essence as a personal abode. The society poured resources into refurbishing surfaces, protecting ornate features, and guaranteeing the structure's endurance for years ahead. Shifting from exclusive home to communal showcase altered Château-sur-Mer at its core. Chambers once filled with intimate family moments and lavish gatherings now hosted guided visitors. Areas tailored for particular roles evolved into interpretive displays. The property turned into a relic halted in history, illuminating a bygone lifestyle rather than reliving it. Still, the effort achieved its core goal. Château-sur-Mer endures as a prime specimen of Second Empire style in the United States. Hunt's ornamental schemes remain open for examination and admiration. It reveals the realities of Gilded Age existence, the rooms they occupied, the standards they upheld. Absent such conservation, everything would have vanished. The difference between Château-sur-Mer's outcome and that of numerous similar properties offers valuable insight. Scores of Newport estates fell to the wrecking ball in the mid-20th century. Their lots were repurposed or abandoned, belongings dispersed via sales and dispersals. Ornamental elements were either rescued or ruined. Only images and recollections linger. Château-sur-Mer dodged this end thanks to various elements. The Wetmore lineage's extended stay preserved its wholeness beyond most peers. The Society's dedication and funding, coupled with rising awareness that built legacies, merited defense despite fiscal drawbacks. Today, it operates as an instructional resource. Guests witness Hunt's elevation of an older edifice into a majestic one. They grasp the dynamic between commissioner and designer. They value the superior execution defining elite Gilded Age creations. They catch a sense of the opulent, refined, and aspirational realm that molded U.S. society in a formative time. George Peabody Wetmore might have felt conflicted about his residence turning into an exhibit space. He prized seclusion and refined domesticity. Open tours clashed with all that Château-sur-Mer symbolized in his era. However, he esteemed aesthetics, design, and societal learning. He could well endorse its current role in enlightening successors on U.S. building accomplishments. Saving Château-sur-Mer mirrors a larger evolution in American views on built legacies. Gilded Age estates, formerly scorned as ostentatious excesses or outdated oddities, now hold status as vital historical items. They chronicle U.S. drive, transatlantic inspirations, design advances, and societal shifts in unmatched depth. Château-sur-Mer's enduring impact. Stroll along Bellevue Avenue now, and Château-sur-Mer appears unlike it did to visitors of that age. What Gilded Age elites viewed as a bold declaration of affluence and sophistication, we regard as a preserved relic. Where George Wetmore perceived a sanctuary, we perceive yet the mansion's importance goes beyond these shifting viewpoints. Château-sur-Mer stands out because it pioneered the way. By constructing his granite residence in 1852, William Wetmore showed that Newport had the potential to evolve past a simple seasonal retreat. This property illustrated how grand design and major funding could thrive along the Rhode Island shoreline. All subsequent estates, ranging from the Breakers to Marble House, drew upon the groundwork Wetmore laid, underscoring its profound architectural impact. Hunt's redesign exemplifies the pinnacle of Second Empire aesthetics adapted for America. Blending the original framework with fresh extensions showcased advanced planning ingenuity. The excellence of its ornamental features established benchmarks that many subsequent homes struggled to equal. At the peak of his career, Hunt crafted a work that merged his European influences with bold American aspirations. Moreover, the estate traces the development of architectural sponsorship in the United States. William Wetmore, a prosperous trader harboring societal goals but holding traditional preferences, differed markedly from his son. George Peabody Wetmore, a refined patron with formal education, engaged effectively with a professional designer. The contrast between the father's initial build and the son's overhaul mirrors wider shifts in how affluent Americans viewed design and their ties to old-world heritage. Château-sur-Mer highlights both the opportunities and constraints in adapting older structures. Hunt lacked the luxury of a blank slate. He needed to incorporate Bradford's prior efforts. What emerged was not outright new development nor mere upkeep, but an artful fusion. This example confirms that careful adaptation, backed by ample means and expert talent, can yield outcomes comparable to fresh constructions. The mansion's societal narrative reveals the intricacies of Gilded Age America. George Wetmore's governmental path, his navigation between Washington duties and Newport leisure, his effort to embody both civic duty and elite refinement, these conflicts unfolded inside Château-sur-Mer's confines. The residence bore witness to the clash of egalitarian governance and elite social striving that defined the period. For scholars of architecture, Château-sur-Mer offers vital insights into Hunt's processes and stylistic progression. It marks a pivotal phase linking his prior endeavors to the colossal undertakings like the Breakers that followed. Examining this house clarifies how Hunt refined the lexicon and approaches he later applied to his renowned masterpieces. Its tale of conservation holds its own weight. Château-sur-Mer's endurance proves that local initiatives and dedicated organizations can rescue structures threatened by commercial pressures. The Preservation Society's efforts at this site and other Newport properties forged preservation strategies now adopted across the country. However, the estate's most profound value might lie in its mere persistence. Vast portions of the Gilded Age have faded away, demolished dwellings, scattered artifacts, lifestyles erased. Château-sur-Mer has endured mostly unaltered, enabling direct encounters instead of mere speculation or revival. The interiors Hunt envisioned remain occupiable, albeit by tourists rather than owners today. The superior standards he and George insisted upon can still be savored and analyzed. This mansion teaches that design encompasses far more than mere edifices. It involves drive, discernment, interpersonal dynamics, financial might, and societal ideals. Château-sur-Mer materializes all these aspects tangibly. Its sturdy granite enclosure holds not only chambers, but narratives of traders and statesmen, designers and artisans, domestic routines and public spectacles. Modern Newport diverges sharply from the opulent seasonal haven that Château-sur-Mer helped forge. The elite enclave has disbanded, class structures have eroded, the customs these estates once sustained have disappeared. Still, the structures persist, no longer serving as homes but as priceless archival assets. Strolling through Château-sur-Mer now, one might dwell on the evident aspects: its grandeur, the artisanal detail, the fortunes needed to erect and sustain it. Yet the property conveys something finer and more essential. It illustrates how design bridges personal dreams and communal exhibition, old-world customs and new-world creativity, historical triumphs and forward-looking goals. William Wetmore sought to proclaim his entry into Newport's elite circles. He triumphed far beyond his expectations, albeit through unforeseen channels. His creation served as the blueprint that elevated Newport from a casual getaway to a showcase of splendor. George Wetmore aimed to fashion a home befitting his continental schooling. He accomplished this, yet in the process contributed to an environment of escalating extravagance that eventually undid itself. Richard Morris Hunt aspired to demonstrate that U.S. design could match continental excellence. He did so time and again, with Château-sur-Mer providing an initial testament to that success. The residence exemplifies how, with an enlightened owner, ample funding, and artistic liberty, U.S. designers could craft structures comparable to Europe's finest. The Preservation Society aimed to protect historic landmarks and inform the community. They triumphed, allowing countless tourists each year to encounter Gilded Age splendor directly, beyond mere images and accounts. The estate fulfills learning roles its creators could scarcely have foreseen, yet likely would have valued. These dreams and triumphs, these clashing aims and interpretations all dwell together inside the Château-sur-Mer's sturdy stone facade. It has functioned at once as declaration and refuge, display and dwelling, secluded abode and communal icon. Its endurance stems from solid construction, careful upkeep, and deep affection from those who grasped its importance. Château-sur-Mer endures not as Newport's most opulent, priciest, or renowned estate, but as the pioneer, and that origin holds profound weight. Prior to the Vanderbilts, prior to the construction surge, prior to Newport embodying Gilded Age extravagance, stood Château-sur-Mer, the seaside fortress that ignited the era. Its stone barriers have endured more than 170 years. They have observed shifts in design, culture, and the country at large. They have sheltered traders and leaders, domestic routines, lavish gatherings, personal refinement, and communal instruction. William Shepherd Wetmore erected Château-sur-Mer to secure his status in Newport's elite circles. He prevailed, albeit enjoying it for just 10 years. His heir, George, elevated the property to unprecedented magnificence, blending continental learning with domestic wealth to forge one of the Gilded Age's standout designs. Richard Morris Hunt showcased his brilliance by reshaping an established structure into a fresh vision, honoring its roots. The estate persists because it resonated across eras. For William, it symbolized success. For George, it represented refinement. For the Preservation Society, it signifies legacy. For contemporary guests, it offers entry to a bygone realm that molded today's United States. Newport evolved encircling Château-sur-Mer, from humble retreat to lavish estate haven, and finally to preserved enclave. The residents observed each stage of that evolution. At times spearheading shifts, at times conforming to them, it ultimately surpassed them all. The seasonal enclave has vanished. The hierarchies that upheld it have faded, yet the edifices linger. They bear witness to drive, discernment, artistry, and structure's lasting ability to capture human longing. Château-sur-Mer persists not as the biggest or most ornate Newport villa, but as the link spanning prior eras and those to come. The estate that affirmed Newport's capacity for bold design pursuits. The edifice that illustrated how U.S. fortunes could yield continental excellence. The manor that launched a serene vacation spot's shift into Gilded Age America's grand exhibit. The seaside castle abides. And in abiding, it keeps enlightening, motivating, and recalling that superior design transcends mere construction. It reflects our past selves, our desired identities, and the legacies we cherish sufficiently to safeguard for future generations.